counting, we are giving implicit permission for things to remain the same. Even among organizations where you think would know better, are not asking questions that would allow the truth of mass incarceration to rise. The Congressional Black Caucus sent letters out to organizational leaders asking them to identify priorities. Of the 35 topics named, the criminal justice system did not appear. Reentry appeared once because somebody wrote it in. The NAACP national website talks about all the major civil rights legislation and all the gains that were made, but it doesn't mention the explosion of black and brown people in jail and in prison and the loss of the gains that it touts on the one hand. So even among the communities of color, we have a difficult time talking about this. On the one hand, I don't know a single person of color who is not related to or knows someone as part of that system. I can't name one. And so for those who may be exceptions, even the CEO of a major national organization was telling me that how he and his wife are dealing with his son who's coming home. There's also the language of mass incarceration that I want to stop so you can some conversation. The language of mass incarceration, when you hear people talking about being away, coming home, getting back, these are code words. If you understand the language, you know that somebody has been to prison, how much longer they have to go, they've got good time, and all the circumstances are. If you don't know that language, you think they're just talking about going away to school. That's part of this not being aware of what's going on, and some of the color blindness. We don't see it, we don't hear it, we're not aware that it's happening. It's invisible, it's right there in front of us, and most of us don't see it. And for those of us who pay taxes, where our tax dollars go to support this. Wait, that's the crux of Dr. Alexander's book. That's a very brief outline. There's so much meat in the middle there that I wish that all of you would sign up to take part in larger discussions. But this is the time now for your questions and your comments.
How do you start getting rid of this? I'm well aware of the prison system being mostly black, 80% probably. How do you start preventing this from happening?
That's a great question. I'm sorry that I did not add that Dr. Alexander does not give the answer. Part of the frustration, she lays all this out historically, topically, legally, and says go to work. One of the things as far as my personal prescription, I think we need to take off our rose-colored lenses. For those of us who've been working on a health issue or an education issue or an employment issue, we need to know that it's connected to mass incarceration. So that when our brothers and sisters are having a legislative day that calls for a change in that, we need to be there to support them, as well as our own particular issue. So people of color, white people, people of all classes need first and foremost to know this is happening, and then to join together. So that would be my initial prescription. Yes, sir.
I just got back from Southern Virginia where I was working with my brother, and I asked both whites and blacks if there would ever be just a Christian church as opposed to a black Christian church and a white Christian church. And both sides said no, that would not ever happen. They said they were two totally separate cultures and that they would never be a single church.
Mm-hmm.
In Brunswick County, where I was residing, there were under 20,000 people. There were 300 churches in the phone book.
Wow. That's a problem.
So there are both gospel churches and evangelical churches, one Roman Catholic church and one synagogue, and that's a complete dichotomy. So my question is, will this ever happen, or is this just a fool's dream?
Well, there's a statement that says that 11 o'clock on Sunday is the most segregated hour in this country, and that's what you just spoke of. Faith and people's religious beliefs and practices is another place that I would hope these conversations take place. Talking about multiculturalism within a faith institution is critical if you're part of a church that is willing to have that conversation. And that's part of that, as I talked about, being willing to let something go. And a pulpit is a great place where people can gather and hear information and share if your religious authority allows sharing and not just being talked to. A number of people of color have left churches because they felt that they were being talked to and not with any longer. In the 60s and 70s, the church was a major, major player in the civil rights movements. In the 21st century, unfortunately, it is no longer. There are intentional, integrated churches. I know of many of them within a lot of different faiths and denominations that have worked hard to say, what do we need to do to bring down this barrier? That's an area that needs to be addressed. And for those of you who are working in faith communities, ask that question. Get together with your leaders, with your congregants and parishioners, and say, why are we having our service over here and across the street they're having it over there if we supposedly believe in the same basic tenets? And listen to the answer. Yes, sir.
You began by saying something to the effect of you'd be disappointed or whatever if we weren't a little bit upset about your presentation in the book. Well, I'm a little bit upset about the book and or your presentation. At the risk of hearing, you just don't get it, meaning I just don't get it, what I heard is a lot of societal issues and societal causes and things like that, which I think most of us would grant. But what I didn't hear, or maybe I missed it, is the idea of individual responsibility and family responsibility, regardless of race.
Okay.
Did I miss something, or is it in the book? Or what about the responsibility of, let's say, the black individual or the black family in terms of the issues that you raised, whether it's raised in the book?
Thank you. Yes, it is in the book, and no, I did not get into it today. Briefly, the idea that a person's actions, a person needs to be responsible for their own actions. If someone robs a store, they have broken the law. The fact that how the law then treats them once they're in that system is part of, that's most what Dr. Alexander writes about. But she's very clear that an individual needs to be accountable for their action. A person who does something foolish, and I'm talking about an adult who is aware of what's going on and makes conscious choices to do wrong, to harm another person, to disregard all the signs that say, do not do such and such, unless it's for civil disobedience. So yes, it is important that an individual have a level of awareness. It is important that the community support individuals and that we educate ourselves, not only in schools, but within the community. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, in the inner city, and I upset a great number of law enforcement officers last fall when I made a comment in response to a woman, a middle-aged, middle-class white woman who got stopped for speeding the first time in her life. And, she pulled over, and then she went to get out of the car. And she went to get out of the car, and the officer put his hand on his holster. And I'm saying, most of you shake your heads. In her upbringing and education, she didn't know you're supposed to stay in the vehicle and keep your hands in plain sight. She thought she'd get out and have a conversation with a nice officer. And I made a comment about, I learned very early, you don't do that. You make sure your hands are in plain sight. And with my short hair, very often I've been taken, people didn't know if I was male or female, they couldn't see my earrings. So some of the stops that happened to me. So the way I was educated was very different, and it was based upon my race and my economic status of my family at the time. And she did not get it, because it never occurred to her that anyone would have to learn what to do at a traffic stop. In terms of individual and community accountability, the fact that our communities, we're not going to church, we're not supporting PTAs, we're not going to school, we're not challenging our children. I was with a friend this morning and congratulating him on his new apartment. Like, oh wow, and there's land here, you can plant a garden. No, the kids will just ruin it. And I said, well, if you plant it and you take care of it and you teach them how to take care of it, won't that be a good thing? No, they're just knuckleheads. So we as a community need to teach ourselves how to care for our properties, how to grow food, how to treat our children. So absolutely, personal and community responsibility are part of this. Yes, in the back.
Me?
Yes, no, first. Go ahead.
I just want to respond to the individual responsibility issue, because it always comes back to
Yes.
this. It's race, but it always comes back to this. The assumption is that there's something wrong with people who are prosecuted and for a crime. and who enter the criminal justice system. That they are bad people
Who just got caught.
who got caught, right? But we also equate crime with blackness. And, you know, therein lies a bit of the problem, because what I think Michelle Alexander does talk about, and she might, I can't remember what's in the book, but
Yes, the color of justice.
but I've spoken to her before about this. And the assumption is that all the rest of us have never committed a crime.
Mhm.
Now, I think we've got to get ourselves to the point where we can see that people who have committed crimes, have been prosecuted for crimes, are just the same as you and me. The issue is that you haven't been caught, and that you have unearned advantages built into the system that makes sure that you don't get caught, or that you're not put in a situation where you have to be involved with any kind of criminal activity.
And even if you do get caught, you have access
You
to
have-
AAA cards and
Right,
attorneys, or you can pay the fine.
You have all of that. So if we keep our system going the way it's going now, pretending that it's colorblind, and that there's something wrong with black people, and that they're all criminals, we're just going to keep going around in a circle.
Mhm.
All the things that Michelle Alexander says in this book are not new. When I read it, I mean, it really hit me. She's a fantastic woman. But everything she says in this book, we've talked about endlessly.
Mhm.
And people come back to that whole issue of, well, you're criminal, so therefore you're different. And until we get rid of that and understand what your unearned advantages are as white people, then we're never going to get to the point that we're going to be able to do something about it. And she does suggest two things. One is to, what you've already said, is to do more public education on this issue so we understand the collateral consequences that people face when they have a conviction record, which keeps them in a caste system. And we also have to work to create a movement that's going to change the way we look at people with conviction records, and to make the kinds of changes, structural changes that need to occur in this society. And she brings it very clear to us that we are in crisis mode right now, but nobody seems to care about it. And this is not new. We've been talking about it for ages.
Yep.
There are people who've been working on this, but people close their minds to it and pretend that it's not happening.
It's all going away. We're in a post-racist society. Yes, sir, you in the back, and I want to make a comment.
I think that you have to read your book first, because once you read it, if you read it with kind of an open mind, you see that the basic piece that you need to understand is that the wording, the laws are fair. It's what we, the people, wanted. It's how they were implemented. That's the issue. In Colony, a kid smoking marijuana is not likely to get picked up and put through the system the way a kid on Arbor Hill will.
Right.
That's the reality. I'm not, responsibility, sure, we need to be responsible, all these other things, true. But the fact is that there were laws made whose by design and implementation, white police officers take young black men off the streets, they've been doing it for 25 years, and then you blame us because our communities are in ruin. That is what's wrong with this. And we need to stop and step back from it and say, where did it start, and how can we fix that, and how can we make it fair? And then from fair, let's become responsible.
The whole idea of systemic racism is talked about in a chapter called The Color of Justice, and the idea of the stigmatization of race. And that's what Alice was just talking about. When we don't say the words, it doesn't make it go away. And even though the gentleman just talked about the criminal justice system having a white police officer, we now have police officers of color. And they're still picking up the young people of color because that's the way the law was chosen to be implemented.